Formula One fans like to think they know what they're talking about, watching every Grand Prix lap, judging drivers' potential and peering into analytics, which means that some Formula One fans even think they have the ability to predict what's going to happen. And if you think about it, they're fools to do so. The number of variables going into a Formula One season are unfathomable, and yet they do it. And even worse, I'm one of them. So let's explore my pre-season predictions, how they went so wrong, and if I'll recover from this before the 2024 season begins, because it was so bad. Now, one thing that I didn't predict was that we'd see 22 drivers on the Formula One grid this season. I predicted that Logan Sargeant would struggle being a rookie and in the Williams car and would come 20th in the standings. Although that Williams was a lot quicker than we expected, and the 21st place finish that he actually picked up was pretty bad. But it was Liam Lawson, who was only on the grid for 5 Grand Prix, who beat Logan Sargeant by a point and also cost me a point here. Nick De Vries has also fallen thanks to the additional AlphaTauri drivers that we saw this year, finishing 22nd in a 20-driver championship, meaning that my prediction of 19th is now way off. If he had stayed the entire season, it might have been quite close. I wasn't expecting him to be amazing, but I also wasn't expecting him to be so bad that the team ditched him after 10 races. This might be my worst prediction though. I had very little faith in Williams, even under James Vowles coming into this season, and I massively underestimated Alex Albon. And the fact that he ended up finishing 13th, comfortably best of the drivers in those bottom 4 teams, and the fact that they didn't bring any big upgrades from around Silverstone onwards, I definitely need to reevaluate them and Alex Albon next year, because I was way out with this one. In 17th, I had Yuki Tsunoda. I just thought that the AlphaTauri car would be pretty rubbish over the course of this year, and for long stretches of the season, that was true. They were bottom of the constructor standings for a while, but Yuki Tsunoda put in some brilliant drives this year and probably deserves even more points than he actually ended up with. I know that he eventually finished 14th, lots of 11th place finishes at the start of the season though, threw away points in Mexico and slotted in just behind Alex Albon. It was actually Daniel Ricciardo who finished in 17th place in the standings. The first driver that I got right was Nico Hülkenberg in 16th place, and as much as I'll take this very small victory, my reasoning was very wrong. I thought that he may struggle when coming back onto the Formula One grid after such a long period on the sidelines. I thought the Haas car was going to be much better than it was, but instead what we saw was Nico Hülkenberg being excellent, and if anything, he was just let down by the car every single weekend. Which isn't the case for Kevin Magnussen, who I had higher than Nico Hülkenberg in 15th place. I thought it was going to be very close between Nico Hülkenberg and Kevin Magnussen. In the end, it really wasn't very close between them at all. Kevin Magnussen had a terrible season overall and was completely outdriven by Nico Hülkenberg, meaning he ended up in 19th place, only a point ahead of Liam Lawson, who again was only in for 5 Grand Prix. Overall, I slightly overestimated Haas and was sold the dream that it would finally be getting better for them. In the end, they came bottom of the constructor standings, and the biggest upgrade package ever didn't really work. I had Zhou Guanyu in 14th place in my predictions, and I was thinking, you know, it being his second season, we usually see a real jump up in performance levels from rookies going into their second campaign because they've done it once and there's less learning to do on the job, but he just really didn't take many steps forwards. Outside of an interesting battle in Spain, I can't remember any other performances that really caught my eye. He kind of went under the radar for the entire season, and he actually finished in 18th place, and with Alfa Romeo becoming Sauber and the whole team being up in the air until Audi come in, I don't have anywhere near as much faith in Zhou Guanyu for next season as I did this season. We've hit our first McLaren driver, and I was trying really hard not to be biased at the start of the year. Plus, you have to remember that team boss Andrea Stella said that this year's car was going to be awful. So I put McLaren what I thought was quite low, but having Piastri 13th when he actually finished in 9th, and with him putting in one of the best rookie campaigns we've seen in years since the likes of Charles Leclerc and his teammate Lando Norris, if he can sort out his tyre management during the 2024 season, we are looking at someone who is ready to cause real headaches for the top drivers on the grid, and I will definitely not underestimate him next year. And then I had Bottas ahead of Piastri in 12th place. What on earth was I thinking? Why did I have so much faith in Alfa Romeo coming into 2023? I just thought Valtteri Bottas was going to be really good for some reason. He started the year quite nicely, but then was pretty anonymous for the rest of it. And I like that Bottas has really come out of his shell off track since moving away from Mercedes. And I don't want to be that guy, but I'd quite like him to turn up on track sometime soon. As I mentioned with Joe, I can't see the team taking massive steps forwards next year, and both of the Alfa Romeo boys, for me, are under quite a lot of pressure and need to do something to prove that they're worth an Audi seat in a couple of years' time. In 11th place, I had Lance Stroll, which is not too bad a guess considering he did finish in 10th place, and at one point it looked like he was going to finish in 12th, which would have meant I was still one place off, but it would have just been the other way. Although considering the pace that the Aston Martin car found this year, which I don't think anybody was predicting at the beginning of the season, even though he did finish in the top half of the table, it wasn't really the best season from Lance Stroll. However, I do think this is the first prediction I'm actually quite happy with, because my reasoning in that Lance Stroll wouldn't perform as well as his teammate and the positioning of the driver are fairly close to what actually happened. Which is not the case for Lando Norris, who I had in 10th place. Again, I was thinking, top half of the table for Lando Norris, considering how bad McLaren is supposed to be looking, would be a pretty good campaign. However, when McLaren decided to bring a completely new car for the Austrian Grand Prix onwards, that was capable of putting Lando Norris on the podium, race after race after race, he was never going to finish in 10th place. So I guess the fact that he finished in 6th place, even though he could have probably finished as high as 4th had things gone slightly differently, I should take the positive because I'm only 4 places out rather than being 6 places out. Although I'd still like him to improve, particularly on those mistakes in qualifying come 2024, because I'm going to be predicting him a lot higher next year. In 9th place, I predicted Esteban Ocon. I did think that the Alpine car would still have the upper hand on the McLaren, which looked to be true, until those upgrades that I mentioned before came onto Lando Norris's car in Austria, and then the disparity between them became absolutely massive. What I should have foreseen is that it's Alpine, and even though Esteban Ocon had a podium finish to his name in Monaco, they would go into the mid-season break, have a crisis where everybody that was working for the team just decided to leave, and that left them in a little bit of a no man's land between the bottom 4 and the top 5 teams. Like, they were much quicker than Williams, but also nowhere near Aston Martin. And even though Esteban Ocon put in some fairly decent performances and was quite unlucky with reliability, I'm not sure a 9th place finish was ever fully on the cards. But I did put his new teammate Pierre Gasly above him in 8th place. So you can see that I predicted the 2 Alpine drivers to be very close to one another, but with Pierre Gasly over the course of a season having that edge over his teammate, which did come true. It was just a few places down the table from here. Gasly had a really lovely period between kind of Monza and Brazil, where he really seemed to find his feet in that Alpine car and was extracting much more pace than his teammate on average. He was looking like he might even hold on to 10th place and finish in the top half too, but in reality it was Alpine, and with some questionable strategy decisions for Pierre Gasly in the last few races, they kind of threw that away, and I had the Frenchman too high because in reality George Russell was the driver to finish in 8th place. Now, although I predicted Fernando Alonso to finish in 7th place, which is quite far away from the 4th place that he actually achieved, I did have him as that best of the rest driver. You'll notice that I haven't mentioned a Ferrari, a Mercedes, or a Red Bull at this point in the list yet, so I'm actually quite happy with this prediction. I figured that the Aston Martin would be the 4th quickest team overall, and I figured that Fernando Alonso would be the driving force behind that. So that's 2 things that have kind of gone my way. What I didn't see coming is that Aston Martin would actually be the 2nd quickest team for the first 6 or 7 races of the season, along with Fernando Alonso putting in some incredible drives and finding some of the performances of his career, meaning that he didn't finish best of the rest, he finished in the bunch with those top 3 teams. And talking of those top 3 teams, I thought that Carlos Sainz was going to be the slowest out of those 6. In reality, he was the only driver outside of a Red Bull to win a Grand Prix this season, which was very, very impressive. It was, however, a strange season for Carlos Sainz. Even though he did pick up that win, he still finished 5th in the championship, behind his teammate and his old teammate in Lando Norris, who actually finished in 6th place, meaning that Carlos dropped to 7th. Now, he wasn't the worst of those top 3 teams because George Russell ended up finishing in 8th place. However, I still think I can be pretty happy with this prediction given the final look of the table and the fact that Ferrari are just Ferrari. And talking of George Russell, I thought he was going to end up in 5th place at the beginning of the season. Now remember, this was coming off the back of a year where he'd beaten Lewis Hamilton in the standings and won his first Grand Prix for Mercedes. So many people at the beginning of the year were saying that 5th place was actually a little bit too low for George Russell. They had faith that the Mercedes car were going to be way quicker than the Ferrari. And actually, I don't think the Mercedes car was ever the 2nd quickest car throughout this season. I, on the other hand, had a little bit more faith in Ferrari after 2022 and actually should have put George Russell even lower because he finished worst of that kind of group behind the Red Bulls, meaning it wasn't a great season for George Russell and he really needs to bounce back next year. Now, I did have a Red Bull in 4th place. It is Sergio Perez. I'm not completely insane. And I think had Red Bull not been ridiculously quick compared to the rest of the field and had Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc not thrown away countless points over the course of this year, this prediction could have come true. Like, Sergio Perez's 2nd place finish in the standings mainly came from the fact that he was the only driver outside of Max Verstappen to win more than one race this season. And that was really early on when it looked like he might have been a title contender, but it very quickly became apparent that he wasn't a title contender. So in hindsight, I should have backed the power of the Red Bull to carry him higher up in the standings, even though I did predict him to have a pretty tough season. In 3rd spot, the second driver that I've got spot on after Nico Hülkenberg in 16th place is Lewis Hamilton. I think we saw another season from him where Lewis's quality really shined through, and even though he had quite a few tough weekends, overall he had that consistency to put in the damage limitations performances that you need to get enough points, and actually he was kind of in the conversation for 2nd place for a few weekends. I was expecting Lewis Hamilton to maybe pick up a win during the 2023 season, especially after 2022 was the first season he'd never won a race, but unfortunately there weren't very many opportunities to win races in 2023 thanks to Max Verstappen, and now we've seen 2 seasons without Lewis Hamilton being on the top step. Surely that can't continue into 2024 as well, considering some of the performances that Lewis Hamilton is able to put in, unless Mercedes get it really wrong. In 2nd spot, I had Charles Leclerc. Now, he did finish in 2nd place during the 2022 season, so this wasn't the craziest prediction that I could have had, and considering how close Ferrari and Leclerc looked to actually challenging Max Verstappen at the beginning of the 2022 season, I thought maybe once again they would be the closest rival, which isn't too wrong. I think if you look at the overall season of 2023, the drivers that came closest to actually competing with Max Verstappen during his real dominance were Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc for me. And when it comes to Charles Leclerc, that was mainly because Leclerc was able to occasionally out-qualify Max. It's just unfortunate that it's becoming a little bit of a pattern that Charles Leclerc picks up pole position, only for Max Verstappen to take the lead a couple of laps in and take the victory quite comfortably. Which of course means I did indeed predict the winner of the 2023 Formula 1 season. I don't think I get too much credit for believing in Max Verstappen and having him top of the driver's standings, especially after 2022 where he broke a lot of Formula 1 records and it didn't look like it could get much better in 2023. Of course, it then did, and all of those records he set in 2022, he then just went on to break again this season. And spoiler for next year, I feel like it's difficult to see anyone displacing Max from the top spot of this Drivers' Championship. As always, I've added up my scores in a golf-like fashion, even though nobody watched the Formula 1 golf event in Vegas, and this year I managed a score of 50 points, which is pretty disappointing. Remember, I'm aiming for 0 until I found out that last year I scored 56, so I am improving. Apart from when I then checked the year before, because in 2021, I scored 30 points. So what we've learned is that since doing this channel, my wheel knowledge has just become worse. But next year, I'm going to smash it. And if you want to be first to see my 2024 predictions, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. And if you've enjoyed this video, I also think you'll really love this video here. So click that link and I'll see you over there.